In 2016, an experienced hiking couple vanished in the Colorado mountains while on an anniversary trip. For 7 long years, their case went cold, leaving their families to believe they had succumbed to the unforgiving wilderness. Then, a hiker stumbled upon a cabin hidden in unmarked territory, a structure that existed on no official map. When authorities forced the door, they found the couple sitting at a perfectly set dinner table, as if waiting to begin a meal. But the claw marks scarring the walls and a door that locked only from the outside revealed that their final days were not spent lost, but imprisoned. What occurred in this hidden cabin? Was this a tragic suicide pact between lovers who couldn't find their way home? Or was the truth something that would make seasoned investigators question everything they thought they knew about evil? Before we dive into what really happened in that cabin, I need you to do something. If stories like this send chills down your spine, hit that like button right now. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because this case touched lives across the country, and the answer came from the most unexpected place. Some of you might be watching this from Colorado, some from places that remind you how vast and unforgiving wilderness can be. Let me know. Now, let's go back to where it all began, to a couple who loved the mountains and had no idea they were being watched. Vincent Brennan, 34, had the kind of face that made you trust him immediately. Software developer from Boulder, methodical in his work, meticulous in his planning, and absolutely devoted to the woman he'd married 4 years earlier. His friends described him as the guy who always had backup batteries, who read trail reports 3 times before a hike, who never took unnecessary risks. Vince was the kind of outdoorsman who respected the wilderness enough to be cautious. Natalie Brennan was 32, born Natalie Foster in a small town outside Denver, and she'd grown up with mountains in her backyard. As a freelance graphic designer, she had the flexibility to disappear into nature for days at a time, and she did exactly that whenever she could. Now, let's go back to where it all began, to a couple who loved the mountains and had no idea they were being watched. Her portfolio was filled with work inspired by the landscapes she photographed, bold colors, sweeping vistas, the kind of art that made you feel like you were standing on a ridge with wind in your face. They'd been together for 7 years, married for 4, and according to everyone who knew them, they were one of those couples that made you believe in soulmates. Their social media was full of hiking photos, always together, always smiling, always at some breathtaking location that Vince had researched and Natalie had perfectly framed with her camera. They finished each other's sentences, their friend Rebecca told investigators later. It was almost annoying how perfect they were together. Like Vince would start telling a story about a hike and Natalie would jump in with the exact detail he was about to mention. They moved through the world like they were 2 parts of the same person. No children yet, but they'd been talking about starting a family. Natalie had mentioned to her sister that they wanted one more big adventure before babies changed everything. One more trip that would be just the 2 of them, the mountains and the endless sky. That's how the anniversary trip was born. September 2016. Their 4th wedding anniversary was approaching, and Vince had been planning something special for months. He'd found a route through the San Gabriel Range near the tiny town of Ashford, Colorado, population 847, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and strangers are immediately noticeable. The plan was for 5 days of backcountry hiking, covering roughly 35 miles of remote terrain. But Vince wasn't reckless. He filed a detailed trip plan with the local ranger station, something experienced hikers do but many forget. The plan included their route, expected camping locations, estimated times, and emergency contacts. He'd packed their emergency satellite communicator, the one he always lectured his younger brother Troy about. If something goes wrong out there, Vince would say, this little device is the difference between rescue and disaster. The route he'd planned included several scenic viewpoints, a ridge walk that Natalie had been wanting to photograph for years, and something else. Something he'd discovered the previous summer during a solo scouting trip. An old cabin. He told Troy about it over beers one night in August. I found this place, man. It's not on any maps. Old hunting cabin. Probably from the 50s, but it's still standing.
I'm thinking anniversary dinner. Just me and Nat, candles, a real meal instead of dehydrated camping food. She'll love it. Troy had laughed and called his brother a hopeless romantic. You're going to carry wine into the backcountry for a cabin dinner? Absolutely. That conversation became important later. Because that cabin, the one Vince was so excited about, the one he thought would be the perfect romantic gesture, wasn't empty. September 18th, 2016. The Brennans drove their white Subaru Outback into Ashford just after noon. The autumn colors were beginning to show in the high country, touches of gold against the dark green pine forests. The air had that crisp quality that comes when summer finally releases its grip on the mountains. They stopped at the Ashford General Store for last-minute supplies. The owner, Pauline Hendricks, remembered them clearly. Young couple, definitely in love, she told investigators weeks later. They were laughing about something, and they bought extra batteries and a bunch of trail mix. The wife was wearing this bright purple vest. I remember because my daughter has the same one. I told her that, and we talked about where she got it. They seemed happy, really happy. Pauline was one of the last people to see them alive. That evening, they checked their gear one final time at the motel where they'd stayed the night. Vince went through his checklist, he always had a checklist, while Natalie charged camera batteries and organized her photography equipment. She'd brought 2 cameras, one for landscapes and one for close-up nature shots, plus extra memory cards and a backup battery pack. Before they left that night, Natalie sent a final text to her sister Claire. The message was simple, cheerful, completely unsuspecting. Going off-grid for our anniversary. See you on the other side of wilderness bliss. Love you. Claire didn't think anything of it. Natalie and Vince went off-grid all the time. They'd be back in 5 days, full of stories and incredible photos. September 19th, 2016, 8:20 a.m. The white Subaru Outback pulled into the parking area at Granite Ridge Trailhead. A trail camera maintained by the Forest Service captured them getting out of the car, shouldering their packs, checking straps and buckles. In the footage, Vince is saying something that makes Natalie laugh. She reaches up and adjusts his pack strap, then kisses him quickly. They look prepared. They look experienced. They look completely unaware that someone was already watching them from the trees. At 8:47 a.m., the same trail camera captures them entering the forest, following the marked path that thousands of hikers take every year. Natalie turns back once and waves at the camera, a spontaneous gesture, smiling. It would be the last confirmed sighting of Vincent and Natalie Brennan alive. But here's the detail that became crucial later, the thing that Troy would fixate on during 7 years of searching. Vince had marked something on his personal map, a location off the official trail. In the margins, in Vince's neat handwriting, were the words "Anniversary Surprise" and a small star symbol. That star marked the location of the cabin that wasn't on any official maps. The cabin that Vince thought would be the perfect romantic spot for their anniversary dinner. The cabin where their bodies would be found 7 years later, sitting across from each other at a table set for 2. September 24th, 2016, Saturday, the day Vincent and Natalie Brennan were supposed to come home. Claire Foster had been checking her phone all morning. Natalie always called as soon as they got back to cell service. Always. Even if it was just a quick, "We're alive, we're exhausted, talk tomorrow," she never left Claire wondering. By noon, Claire tried calling, straight to voicemail. She told herself it was nothing. Maybe they'd decided to stay an extra day. Maybe they'd lost track of time. Maybe the trail back took longer than expected. By 3 p.m., she tried again. Still nothing. By 6 p.m., she called Troy. "Have you heard from Vince?" "No, but they're not due back until today. Give them time." "I'm worried." They're experienced, Claire. They've done trips like this dozens of times. But Troy's voice had an edge to it, because he was worried too. Vince always checked in. Always. By 9 p.m., both families were making calls. No one had heard from the Brennans. Their social media hadn't been updated, not surprising since they were off-grid, but Natalie usually posted photos the moment she got service back. At 10:30 p.m., Troy made the decision. I'm driving to Ashford, tonight. It's 3 hours, his wife protested. I don't care. Something's wrong. He arrived in Ashford just after 1:30 a.m. and spent the rest of the night in his car in the parking lot of the closed general store, waiting for dawn. September 25, 2016, 7 a.m. Troy Brennan walked into the Rio Blanco County Sheriff's Office and filed a missing persons report. Sheriff Roland Webb, a 28-year veteran with a weathered face and calm demeanor, took the report personally. He'd handled missing hikers before. The mountains were beautiful but unforgiving, and every year someone underestimated them. But as he listened to Troy describe his brother, experienced, careful, meticulous, Webb's expression shifted from routine concern to genuine attention. They filed a trip plan? Yes, detailed. Vince always did. Emergency communicator? Always. He used to lecture me about it. And they're not reckless? Not the type to go off-route chasing a view? Troy hesitated. Vince mentioned finding an old cabin last year. Said he was going to take Natalie there for a special anniversary dinner. But he knew where it was. He'd been there before. Webb made a note. Did he mark it on his filed plan? I don't know. By 2 p.m. that same day, a search and rescue team of 15 people mobilized from the Granite Ridge trailhead. Among them was Ranger Douglas Crane, who'd worked these mountains for 12 years and knew every official trail, every seasonal danger, every place where hikers commonly got into trouble. Bloodhounds were brought in. They picked up the scent immediately. The dogs practically pulled their handlers down the trail, following the route that Vincent and Natalie had filed. For 8 miles, the trail was clear. The dogs were confident, the scent strong. Then, at mile marker 8, near a place called Whispering Creek where snowmelt creates a small waterfall in spring, something changed. The dogs stopped, circled, whined. "What's wrong?" Webb asked the handler. They lost it, completely. Trails don't just end. This one did. Ranger Crane walked the area carefully, his eyes scanning the ground. The official trail continued northeast, well-marked, frequently used. But there, just off the trail, partially hidden by fallen pine needles, were fresh boot prints. 2 sets, different sizes, heading in a direction that wasn't on the Brennans' filed route, heading northeast, toward an area that even Ranger Crane rarely entered. The terrain was brutal there. Dense forest, steep ravines, old mining operations that had ceased in the 1970s, leaving behind unstable shafts and collapsing tunnels. The locals called it the Forgotten Valley, not because it had some official designation, but because even locals forgot it existed. There were no trails, no camping sites, no reason to go there. Why would they go that way? Webb asked. They wouldn't, Crane said, unless they were following someone who knew exactly where they were going. September 26th and 27th brought helicopter flyovers and ground teams pushing into the Forgotten Valley. The weather was turning, temperatures dropping to near freezing at night, and the first hints of snow appearing on the highest peaks. Time was running out if Vincent and Natalie were injured and exposed. But the teams found nothing. No campsite, no discarded gear, no torn pieces of clothing caught on branches. The forest had swallowed them completely. Then, on September 28th, a search team combing a different section of the valley found something that made everyone stop. A small clearing, just large enough for someone to rest. On the ground, pressed into a patch of soft earth, a granola bar wrapper. Brand name clearly visible. "Check the store receipt," Webb ordered. The receipt from the Ashford General Store, found in the Brennans' car, listed that exact brand of granola bar. But next to the wrapper was something else, a boot print. Deep, clear, much larger than the prints they'd been following. Forensics estimated men's size 13, with an aggressive tread pattern designed for serious backcountry hiking. There was someone else out here, Webb said quietly. No one wanted to say what they were all thinking, that maybe Vincent and Natalie Brennan hadn't gotten lost. Maybe they'd been taken. By the end of September, the search for Vincent and Natalie Brennan had become a full-scale operation that dominated local news and gripped the attention of everyone who loved the Colorado wilderness. More than 40 volunteers joined to professional search teams. Some were friends of the Brennans who drove from Boulder. Others were experienced search and rescue volunteers who'd answered the call. And some were simply people who couldn't stand the thought of a young couple dying alone in the mountains while everyone else was safe at home.
Claire Foster and Troy Brennan practically moved into the command post that had been set up near the trailhead. They stayed in a small motel in Ashford, and every morning before dawn they were at the command post, drinking bitter coffee and studying maps, hoping today would be the day. The media coverage began slowly, then exploded. "Boulder couple missing in Colorado backcountry," read the headlines. Local news stations sent reporters to Ashford. The story hit regional television, then national true crime shows. A social media campaign emerged organically. #FindTheBrennan. Thousands of people shared the last photos of Vincent and Natalie, taken from their social media, smiling, healthy, vibrant, so obviously in love. October 1st, 2016. A massive coordinated search of 50 square miles was organized. Teams spread across the Forgotten Valley in a grid pattern, methodically covering every section. Thermal imaging drones flew overhead, their cameras searching for the heat signature of a living person or even recently deceased remains. Result? Nothing. Sheriff Webb's working theory was starting to form, though he didn't share it with the families yet. Accident followed by disorientation, he told his deputies. Maybe one of them got injured, the other went for help, got turned around. These mountains all look the same when you're panicking. But Ranger Crane wasn't convinced. He'd seen the way Vince had filled out that trip plan, careful, detailed, thoughtful. Vince Brennan knew these mountains, Crane said during a briefing. Even injured, even scared, he'd follow basic protocols. He'd follow water downstream. He'd mark his trail. Something else happened. The strange boot print kept bothering everyone. Someone else had been in those woods, but who, and why hadn't they come forward? Week 2 began with October snows arriving in the higher elevations. The search and rescue teams continued, but the conditions were becoming dangerous for the volunteers. Professional teams pushed deeper into the most remote sections, but the area was vast, hundreds of square miles of roadless wilderness where a person could disappear forever. Troy made an emotional plea on local news, standing in front of the command post with the mountains behind him. "If anyone has seen anything, heard anything, please come forward. My brother and sister-in-law are out there. They're experienced, they're careful, but something went wrong. Someone might have seen something without realizing it was important. Please." Tips flooded in. Every single one was investigated. All of them led nowhere.
Then, on October 12th, a day hiker found something 12 miles from the original trailhead in an area that definitely wasn't on the Brennans' planned route. A backpack, dark blue, Osprey brand, partially hidden under a fallen log. The backpack contained Natalie's graphic design sketchbook and Vince's GPS unit. Sheriff Webb's team examined both items carefully. The GPS unit had water damage, strange considering the weather had been clear during the Brennans' trip. The internal circuitry was corroded, the data unrecoverable, but the sketchbook was intact. Troy was called to identify the items. He confirmed immediately. "That's Natalie's handwriting. That's her sketchbook. She took it everywhere to sketch ideas." Webb flipped through the pages carefully. Landscape sketches, design concepts, a drawing of Vince sleeping in a tent, peaceful, done with obvious affection. Then, on one of the last pages with any markings, they found it. A detailed drawing of a cabin. Wood construction, specific window placement, a distinctive stone chimney. The detail was remarkable. Natalie had drawn it like an architectural rendering, showing the structure from an angle that suggested she was looking at a reference or a memory. Caption in her handwriting: "V's secret anniversary surprise, so beautiful." Below that, in different ink, written harder with the pencil pressed deep enough to indent the page, "Watched." The word was underlined twice. Troy stared at the page. She drew this before they left. Vince told her about the cabin he'd found. She must have been excited about it. But this word, Webb pointed to watched, this was added later, different pen pressure, maybe even added while they were on the trail. What does it mean? It means your brother and sister-in-law felt like someone was watching them. The search evolution began immediately. Focus shifted to finding old cabins that matched Natalie's drawing. Ranger Crane spent 2 days in the county archives, pulling old maps and forestry documents, trying to identify every abandoned structure in the region. He found references to 23 different abandoned buildings, old mining cabins, hunter shelters, ranger stations that had been decommissioned. Most were marked on maps, at least the historical ones. Teams began systematic checks. They visited collapsed ruins and buildings that had been reduced to foundation stones. They found structures that matched some elements of Natalie's drawing but not others. None of them felt right. None of them sparked recognition in Troy when he was shown photos. The cabin that Vince had been so excited about, the one he'd found the previous summer, the one he'd planned to take Natalie to for their anniversary dinner, remained elusive. It was as if it had never existed at all. October 28, 2016. The first major snowstorm of the season hit the San Gabriel Range with a fury that turned the mountains white and made high-elevation areas completely inaccessible. Sheriff Webb stood in his office, staring at the weather report, and made the hardest call of his career. We're suspending the active search until spring. The decision devastated the families, but they understood. Search teams couldn't safely operate in the conditions that were coming. The mountains had become lethal, not just to the people who might be lost there, but to the people trying to find them. "We'll resume the moment the snow melts," Webb promised Troy and Claire. "I'm not giving up. We're just pausing." The case was officially classified, missing persons, presumed lost deceased. But Troy Brennan refused to accept it. Winter 2016-2017 was brutal for Troy. He couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on work. His marriage strained under the weight of his obsession. Every evening, he spread maps across his dining room table and studied them until his eyes burned. Mining history, forestry records, old property surveys. He read everything he could find about the Forgotten Valley. He became an expert on a place he'd never actually visited. Claire Foster took a different path. She created a memorial page for Natalie, filling it with photos and memories. But unlike most memorial pages, she kept updating it with one word: still searching, still hoping. April 2017. The snow melted. True to his word, Sheriff Webb resumed the search. But the team was smaller now. Just professional search and rescue, a few dedicated volunteers, and Troy, who'd become a fixture on every expedition. They spent 3 weeks covering the remaining structures on Ranger Crane's list. They found old mining cabins with collapsed roofs, hunter shelters that were nothing but rotted timber, an abandoned ranger station that had been thoroughly searched before. None matched Natalie's drawing. None showed any signs of recent occupation. After 3 weeks, they had to admit they'd found nothing new. Sheriff Webb's theory evolved. The third boot print remained unexplained. The backpack placement had seemed deliberate, not accidental, as if someone had removed identifying items and planted it to misdirect the search. He began considering something he hadn't wanted to say out loud: foul play. But foul play required evidence of a crime. There were no suspects, no motives, no witnesses, no bodies, just absence. September 2017. The 1-year anniversary of the Brennans' disappearance. The families organized a memorial hike, retracing Vincent and Natalie's planned route as far as Whispering Creek, where the trail had gone cold. More than 50 people showed up: friends, volunteers, community members who'd never met the Brennans but had been moved by their story. At the trailhead, they left flowers and placed a small stone cairn with a plaque: "In loving memory of Vincent and Natalie Brennan, may they find their way home." Local news covered the event. Troy gave a brief statement, his voice thick with emotion. "They're out there somewhere, and someone knows what happened. Someone saw something. We won't stop until we have answers." But as the years passed, the active searching slowed. 2018 brought occasional expeditions organized by Troy and dedicated volunteers. They pushed into areas they'd searched before, hoping fresh eyes might see something that had been missed. 2019 brought renewed attention when a popular true crime podcast devoted an entire season to the case. The Forgotten Valley Vanishing brought thousands of new tips. FBI analysts were brought in to help sort through them. Every lead was investigated. All of them were dead ends. 2020 brought the pandemic, which halted search efforts entirely. The mountains closed to all but essential personnel. 2021 brought Sheriff Webb's retirement. He handed the case file to his successor, a younger woman named Linda Voss, with a single piece of advice. Don't let this one go cold. Those kids are out there. Someone knows what happened. 2022 brought resignation. The case file gathered dust in the sheriff's office. Officially still open, but unofficially cold. Claire had moved forward with her life, though she still maintained Natalie's memorial page. Troy's marriage had ended. His ex-wife said she couldn't compete with a ghost. He'd moved closer to Ashford, taking a remote job that let him live near the mountains. He'd never stopped searching. Then, in August 2022, something happened. A hiker reported seeing someone living rough deep in the Forgotten Valley. A large man, alone, carrying supplies.
When the hiker called out a greeting, the man had vanished into the trees without responding. Sheriff Voss sent deputies to investigate. They found evidence of a camp. Old, probably abandoned weeks or months earlier. A fire pit, some trash, a flattened area where a tent had been. Among the trash, one of the deputies noticed something. A faded wrapper from a protein bar. The brand had been discontinued in 2017. The wrapper could have been there for years. Could be completely unrelated. Could be coincidence. But it was dated, and the date was from 2016. It wasn't enough to reopen the investigation, but it was enough to make Sheriff Voss pull out the case file and read through it one more time, wondering if everyone had been looking in the wrong places. By 2023, Troy Brennan had become something the locals in Ashford recognized but didn't quite understand. The man who couldn't let go. The brother who'd spent 7 years searching for answers that the mountains refused to give. He'd collected every mining map, every forestry document, every property record related to the Forgotten Valley. His small rental house in Ashford looked like a detective's office from a crime show. Walls covered with maps, strings connecting locations, notes written in the margins. He'd created a detailed database of every structure ever built in the region, cross-referenced by date, by company, by purpose. Hunting cabins, mining offices, storage sheds, tool shacks, ranger stations. His friends worried about him. His family urged him to move on. But Troy couldn't. Vince would do the same for me, he'd say, and everyone knew he was right. In the spring of 2023, Troy found something in old mining company records from 1952 that made his heart race. A single line in a property inventory. Private cabin, North Forgotten Valley sector, management use only. No map coordinates, no photograph, just that brief mention. And then, nothing. The cabin wasn't listed in any subsequent inventory. It wasn't officially decommissioned or demolished. After 1968, it simply disappeared from the records, as if someone had deliberately erased it. Troy became convinced that this was the cabin from Natalie's drawing, the anniversary surprise that Vince had been so excited about, the place that wasn't on any official maps. Spring and summer 2023 brought multiple solo trips into the North Forgotten Valley. Troy would take a week off work, pack his gear, and disappear into the wilderness. The terrain was brutal, nearly roadless, choked with dense forest, cut by steep ravines that seemed designed to break ankles. Even experienced hikers avoided the area. There was nothing there. No scenic views, no fishing lakes, no peaks worth summiting. Just mile after mile of difficult, unrewarding terrain. But Troy pushed deeper each trip, following hunches and old mining roads that had been reclaimed by nature. He never found it. Meanwhile, Claire Foster had found some measure of peace. "I think they got lost, and the mountain took them," she told a friend. "I've accepted that. It's the only way I can keep living. I've mourned Natalie. I'll always love her, but I can't spend my whole life searching for answers that might not exist. She still organized an annual memorial on the anniversary of the disappearance, still updated Natalie's page with photos and memories. But she'd let go of the desperate hope that had consumed those first years. She worried about Troy. I wish he could find closure too, she told her husband. But I respect his need to search. Maybe that's how he grieves. October 15th, 2023. Felix Ortega and Danny Russo weren't looking for missing hikers. They were pursuing a wounded elk through brush so thick it required machetes in some places. Felix had been hunting elk in Colorado for 40 years. He knew these mountains better than most rangers. But even he had never pushed this far into the North Forgotten Valley. There was no reason to. The elk didn't usually come here. The terrain was too brutal, the vegetation too dense. But this wounded elk had other ideas. "We're miles from anything," Danny said around 2 p.m., checking his GPS. "We should mark it and come back." "We wounded it, we track it," Felix replied. That was the hunter's code. You don't leave an animal to suffer. They pushed through a thicket of pine so dense it blocked out most of the afternoon sun. The forest here felt different, older, quieter, like they'd crossed into some place that time had forgotten. Then they broke through into a clearing barely large enough to hold the structure in its center. The cabin looked like it had grown from the mountain itself. Weathered wood, stone chimney, shuttered windows. Everything built to blend into the landscape, to be invisible unless you were standing directly in front of it. Felix stopped. "I've been hunting these mountains for 4 decades," he said slowly. "I didn't know this was here." That's how remote it was, how hidden. You could pass within 100 yards and never know it existed. Felix approached the cabin slowly, every instinct honed by years in the wilderness telling him something was wrong. The structure was too intact, too well preserved. And there was something about the silence. The forest was quiet in a way that made the hair on his arms stand up. "Hello?" he called out. "Anyone home?" No response, just the whisper of wind through the trees. The windows were all shuttered from the outside with heavy wooden boards. Fresh-ish nails, not rusted through, though weathered. Someone had maintained this place. The door was the same way, boarded shut. Danny walked the perimeter. No smoke from the chimney, no tracks. Whoever used this, they're long gone. But Felix couldn't shake the feeling. He studied the shutters until he found what he was looking for, a gap where the wood had warped slightly, leaving a narrow opening. "I'm going to look inside." "Why?" "Because something's not right here." Felix pressed his face close to the gap and peered through. The interior was dark, his eyes needing a moment to adjust. Then he started to make out shapes. A table, round, covered with dark fabric. 2 chairs facing each other, place settings. And sitting at the table? "Oh God!" Felix stumbled backward. "There's someone in there." "What?" 2 people, at the table. They're just sitting there." Danny pushed forward, looked through the same gap. His face went pale. "Are they alive?" "I don't think so." They stood in the clearing for a long moment, the reality of what they'd found settling over them like the mountain cold. "We need to call this in," Danny said. "Right now." "Should we open it? What if they need help?" "You saw them. They don't need help. Not anymore." But Felix was already moving to the door, pulling at the boards. "If there's any chance?" The boards came away easier than expected. The door beneath wasn't locked, just closed. It swung open with a creak that echoed through the clearing. The smell hit them immediately. Sweet, musty, wrong. Not the sharp stink of recent death, but something older, preserved. The interior was exactly what you'd imagine from an old mountain cabin, but it felt staged, deliberate. Wide plank floors, warm wood paneling covering the walls, exposed ceiling beams. A small kitchen area with vintage appliances, a wood stove, old cabinets, a white refrigerator that clearly hadn't run in years. But the focal point was the dining table, round, dark green cloth draped over it. 2 plaid chairs positioned across from each other. 2 complete place settings, Plates, forks, knives, wine glasses. The food on the plates had decomposed into blackened masses, but you could still see it had been portioned equally. The wine glasses held dried residue that had once been red wine. Candles had been placed around the table, melted down to nothing but puddles of wax that had hardened into organic shapes. And sitting at that table, positioned carefully, were two bodies. The man wore hiking clothes, an orange jacket, bright, technical fabric designed for visibility and weather protection. His head was tilted slightly downward, as if he'd fallen asleep while eating. His hands were folded in his lap. His face was partially mummified, skin drawn tight over bone, but features still recognizable. The woman across from him wore a gray shirt and a purple vest, vibrant purple, the kind that doesn't fade even in death. Her hair hung in motionless strands around her face. Her hands were also folded in her lap. Her expression was neither peaceful nor pained, just waiting. They looked like a couple interrupted mid-dinner, like they'd been about to speak when time had frozen them in place. "Jesus Christ," Danny whispered. Felix pulled out his phone, realized he was shaking. Somehow, miraculously, he had 1 bar of service, just enough. He pulled up Google, typed Colorado Missing Couple 2016. Vincent and Natalie Brennan's photos filled the screen. Young, smiling, alive. Felix looked at the photos, looked at the bodies, looked at the purple vest that the store owner in Ashford had remembered because her daughter had the same one. These are the Brennans, the couple who vanished 7 years ago. As Felix dialed 911, Danny walked slowly around the cabin's interior, trying to understand what he was seeing. The staging, the deliberate arrangement, the dinner that had been prepared with care. Then he noticed the walls. Dozens of photographs were tacked up. Recent photographs, based on the colors and quality, all candid shots. People hiking, camping, sitting around fires, none of them looking at the camera. Surveillance photos. And in the corner, partially hidden behind what looked like a storage closet, was a single large hiking boot, size 13 by the look of it. The same size as the boot print found 7 years ago when the search had just begun. The call reached the Rio Blanco County Sheriff's Office at 3:15 p.m. "This is Felix Ortega. I'm in the North Forgotten Valley. We found a cabin. There are 2 bodies inside. I think they're the Brennans, the couple who went missing in 2016. Sheriff Linda Voss took the call personally. She'd read that case filed dozens of times in the 2 years since she'd taken over from Webb. She knew every detail, every false lead, every dead end." "You're sure?" "The woman is wearing a purple vest. That detail was in all the missing person reports." "Don't touch anything else. We're coming to you." The scene was 18 miles from the nearest road access. The only way to get forensics equipment in was by helicopter. By 6 p.m., a full investigation team was on site. Sheriff Voss, a forensics team from the State Crime Lab, medical examiner Dr. Philip Castellano, and 2 deputies who specialized in wilderness crime scenes. The cabin was photographed extensively before anyone went inside. Every angle documented. The boarded windows, the door, the exterior weathering, the way the structure had been positioned in the landscape to be invisible from any approach except dead on. When the forensics team entered, they moved with careful precision. This wasn't a crime scene that could be contaminated with careless movement. Every detail mattered. "This is staged," Dr. Castellano said immediately. "Look at the bodies. They're positioned. Those aren't natural death poses." The bodies were indeed positioned deliberately. Back straight, hands folded in laps, heads tilted just slightly, like they were lost in thought. Not slumped, not fallen. They were arranged after death, Dr. Castellano confirmed. Rigor mortis would have locked them in whatever position they died in. Someone moved them into these poses after they were dead. The preliminary assessment confirmed what Felix had suspected. The bodies were Vincent and Natalie Brennan, later confirmed via dental records. The mummification was due to the dry cabin environment and high altitude.
In the right conditions, bodies could naturally mummify, preserving tissue that would normally decompose. Initial estimate: they'd been dead approximately 6 to 7 years. The timeline matched their disappearance perfectly. The cabin layout was simple. Single room, approximately 20 by 24 feet. Kitchen area with a wood stove that showed signs of recent use. Sleeping area with a double bed frame but no mattress. Dining area where the bodies were found. Small storage closet. As the forensics team worked, the disturbing details began emerging. The door was the first revelation. From the outside, it was an ordinary cabin door with an ordinary lock. But from the inside, the lock mechanism was wrong. It worked only from the outside. The inside handle had been removed at some point. You could see the screw holes where it had been. And below those screw holes, deep scratches in the wood. Forensics examined them carefully under bright LED work lights. "These are nail marks," one of the technicians said. "Someone tried to claw their way through this door." The windows revealed a similar horror. The shutters were all boarded from the exterior. Anyone inside would have no way to remove them. But beneath the boards, the windows themselves showed scratches on the interior glass. Someone had tried desperately to break through. The glass was thick, possibly reinforced, and had resisted all attempts. This cabin had been turned into a prison. The storage closet contained supplies. Canned food, water jugs, basic first aid supplies. Enough for several weeks at least. But most of it hadn't been touched. Water jugs still sealed, cans unopened. "Why wouldn't they eat or drink?" a deputy asked. "Fear," Dr. Castellano said quietly. "Maybe they thought it was poisoned." The table setting was analyzed in detail. The food on the plates was decomposed but still analyzable. Appeared to be canned stew heated and served. 2 portions, carefully measured to be equal. The wine glasses contained dried residue from red wine. But here was the detail that made everyone stop. There was only 1 wine bottle in the cabin. It sat on the kitchen counter, empty. Fingerprints on the bottle? Only 1 set. And they didn't match Vincent or Natalie. Someone else had opened that wine. Someone else had poured it. Then, under the table, one of the forensics technicians found something that made her call the sheriff over immediately. A small notebook. Water damaged but readable. Natalie's handwriting, confirmed by comparing it to the sketchbook found years earlier. Journal entries. Sparse, desperate. Sheriff Voss read them aloud, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly. Day 3. He says he'll let us go when we understand. Understand what? V is trying to stay calm for me, but I can see he's terrified too. Day 8. Food running low. He brought more today, didn't speak, just watched us through the gap in the boards. Day 14. V tried rushing him when door opened, didn't work. V has broken ribs now. That man is stronger than he looks. Day, lost count. V says we should eat the dinner he prepared. Maybe if we do what he wants, he'll really let us go. I don't believe that anymore. But I'm so tired. The last entry was written in shakier handwriting, as if Natalie's hand had barely been able to hold the pen. The wine tastes bitter. The cabin fell silent, except for the mechanical sounds of cameras and equipment. They'd been kept here for weeks. Someone had locked them in this cabin, visited them periodically, brought them food, watched them through gaps in the shutters. And when he decided it was time, he'd prepared one final meal, poisoned the wine, and staged them at the table. The photographs on the walls were examined next. 47 different photographs, all candid shots of people in the wilderness. Different faces, different locations, different dates based on the clothing and photo quality. One of the forensics technicians had a good memory for missing persons cases. "Sheriff, I recognize some of these faces. These people were reported missing." They counted 8 photographs showing people who'd been reported missing in Colorado over the past 15 years. 3 of those cases were still unsolved. Vincent and Natalie weren't the first. They probably weren't the last. The boot in the corner was collected carefully. Size 13 Timberland hiking boot, heavily worn. The tread pattern matched descriptions from the boot print found in 2016 during the initial search.
Forensic analysis would later reveal soil samples from multiple locations across Colorado wilderness. This boot had traveled extensively. DNA extraction was attempted from the boot interior. The results would take time, but if there was enough genetic material, they might finally have a profile of their suspect. Dr. Castellano performed his examination of Vincent's body with particular attention. The healed fractures on 3 ribs, right side, were immediately apparent. They matched Natalie's journal entry perfectly. Vincent had rushed someone and paid for it with broken ribs. There were also healed defensive wounds on Vincent's hands, small scars consistent with fighting, grabbing, struggling. He'd fought for their lives, multiple times. It hadn't been enough. Sheriff Voss stood in the center of the cabin as the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the door that was now standing open. The nightmare scenario was becoming clear. The Brennans had been abducted, possibly on the trail or maybe when they reached this cabin. They'd been held prisoner here for weeks, possibly longer. Someone had visited periodically, bringing food, watching them. Not for sexual assault, there was no evidence of that. Not for ransom, no one had ever been contacted. For something else, some twisted purpose that only made sense to a deeply disturbed mind. And when that purpose was fulfilled, or when he'd grown tired of his experiment, he'd prepared one final meal, heated the food, poured the poisoned wine, positioned the bodies after death to create his tableau, a romantic anniversary dinner, frozen in time. The forensic toxicologist examined the dried wine residue carefully, running multiple tests. The results came back consistent and damning. Traces of zolpidem, the active ingredient in Ambien, in an extreme concentration, enough to kill, especially in victims already weakened by stress, fear, and malnutrition. This wasn't an overdose, the toxicologist reported. This was an execution disguised as mercy. The autopsy results confirmed what everyone already suspected, but reading the clinical language in the report somehow made it worse. Official cause of death: acute zolpidem toxicity. Contributing factors: severe dehydration, advanced malnutrition, exposure to psychological trauma. Time of death estimated: late October to early November 2016, approximately 3 to 6 weeks after their disappearance. They'd survived in that cabin for weeks, every day hoping someone would find them, every night growing more desperate, every moment knowing that somewhere search teams were looking, but not looking in the right place. The DNA evidence became the key to everything. The lab technicians extracted genetic material from multiple sources: the fingerprints on the wine bottle, a hair sample found on the bed frame, skin cells from the exterior door handle, and DNA from inside the boot. All of it matched. All of it came from the same person, a male subject. Not Vincent, not Natalie. Their captor. The DNA profile was entered into CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, which contains profiles of convicted offenders and arrestees from across the country. No match. Whoever this was, he'd never been arrested, never been convicted, never been in the system. He was a ghost. But they had his genetic profile now, and that was something they'd never had before. The backpack that had been found in 2016, the one containing Natalie's sketchbook and Vince's damaged GPS unit, was re-examined with this new context. Forensics found DNA traces on the straps, the same profile as the wine bottle. The pieces fit together. After abducting the Brennans, their captor had taken their backpack, removed anything that might lead searchers to the actual location, and deliberately planted it miles away. Intentional misdirection, designed to send search teams in the wrong direction. It had worked perfectly, for 7 years. The boot print found during the original 2016 search was compared to the boot found in the cabin. Perfect match. The tread pattern, the wear indicators, the size, all identical. This meant their suspect had been tracking Vincent and Natalie from almost the beginning. Maybe from the trailhead. Maybe he'd been watching, waiting for the right moment. The FBI brought in Dr. Marcus Reeves, a behavioral analyst who specialized in isolated offenders and wilderness crimes.
He spent 2 days reviewing all the evidence, reading Natalie's journal entries, examining photos of the cabin setup. His profile was chilling in its specificity. Male subject, likely between 35 and 55 years old at the time of the crime. Physically strong, capable of overpowering a fit adult male. Experienced outdoorsman with extensive knowledge of wilderness survival. Lives an isolated lifestyle, possibly in wilderness areas for extended periods. Suffers from severe attachment disorder and need for control. This isn't a crime of passion or impulse. Everything here is planned, methodical. The cabin was prepared in advance as a holding facility. The locks added deliberately. The supplies stocked carefully. The subject doesn't kill impulsively. He's patient. He studies his victims, tracks them, learns their patterns before making contact. The surveillance photos suggest he's been doing this for years, possibly more than a decade. The dinner staging is particularly significant. It suggests ritualistic thinking. He's creating a scene that holds meaning for him, forcing intimacy, manufacturing connection. This is someone profoundly isolated, who believes he's creating something beautiful, even as he's creating horror.
He'll do it again if not stopped. This type of offender doesn't stop voluntarily. The pattern is too important to them. The forensic analysis of the cabin itself revealed another crucial detail. The wood and construction techniques dated to the 1950s, matching the records Troy had found. But recent modifications had been made, within the last 15 years, based on the weathering patterns. Someone had been maintaining this cabin, upgrading it. The exterior locks were new. The window glass had been reinforced. The roof had been weatherproofed with modern materials. This wasn't an opportunistic crime. This cabin had been prepared in advance as a prison, possibly for years before the Brennans were taken. How many others had been held here before? The photographs on the wall suggested the number might be horrifying. October 23, 2023. Sheriff Linda Voss stood before a wall of cameras and reporters in the conference room at the Rio Blanco County Sheriff's Office. The national media had descended on Ashford like a storm the moment news broke that the Brennans had been found. I can confirm that the remains of Vincent and Natalie Brennan have been located in a remote cabin in the San Gabriel Range, Voss said, her voice steady. This is now a homicide investigation. We are actively searching for a suspect who may be living in remote wilderness areas of Colorado. She didn't release all the details. The journal entries, the poisoned wine, the photographs on the wall, those were held back to protect the investigation. But she said enough to make it clear this wasn't a hiking accident. This couple was taken from us by another person. We will find who did this. The story went national within hours. Colorado couple found after 7 years, held captive in remote cabin, screamed the headlines. True crime shows cleared their schedules. The Reddit threads exploded with theories. Everyone wanted to know, who could do something like this? Troy Brennan's statement was brief. We finally know what happened. Now we need justice. Someone knows who this is. Someone has seen him. Please come forward. Claire Foster's words were more haunting. They were kept like prisoners. For weeks they waited for someone to save them. We were searching, but we didn't find them in time. No one came. I'll live with that forever. A multi-agency task force formed immediately. U.S. Forest Service, FBI, Colorado State Police, and local sheriff's departments from 3 counties. The focus was on the North Forgotten Valley and the surrounding wilderness areas. They were looking for signs of long-term wilderness habitation, campsites, supply caches, trails that weren't on any maps. Any indication that someone had been living off-grid for years. Rangers, hunters, and local hermits were all interviewed. Had anyone seen a large man traveling alone, acting strangely? Had anyone noticed supplies disappearing from hunting cabins? Food caches disturbed? Unusual activity in remote areas? Then, on October 27th, someone came forward with information that broke the case wide open. Ranger Thomas Boyle had worked for the Forest Service from 2008 to 2019 before retiring.
He lived in Ashford now, and he'd been following the news coverage with increasing discomfort. Finally, he walked into Sheriff Voss's office. "I think I met him," Boyle said. "In 2014, I was doing trail maintenance on one of the old mining roads when I encountered a man hiking. He was carrying an unusual amount of supplies, way more than you'd need for a weekend trip, more like months' worth." "Did you speak to him?" "I asked where he was headed. Friendly conversation, you know. Rangers do that all the time. But he got aggressive. Told me I should mind my business and stay on marked trails. His exact words. Then he just walked past me like I wasn't there." "Can you describe him?" "White male, I'd say early to mid-40s at the time. Roughly 6'2", lean but strong-looking. Unkempt beard, long hair. He moved like someone who spent all his time in the wilderness. Confident, quiet." "Anything else?" Boyle nodded. "I noticed his boots because they were the same brand I wore, Timberlands, but his were size 13, way bigger than mine. I remember thinking you'd need feet that big to carry all the supplies he had." The FBI cross-referenced the surveillance photos from the cabin wall with missing persons cases from the past 15 years. They identified 8 individuals definitively, contacted their families, and began building a timeline. 3 cases were particularly significant. 2011, Bryn Cassidy, 28, solo hiker, disappeared near the San Gabriel Range. Never found. 2014, Kieran and Meredith Walsh, a couple in their early 30s, vanished while hiking near the Forgotten Valley. Never found.
2018, Isaac Drummond, 31, photographer, last seen heading into the Forgotten Valley. Never found. All of them disappeared in fall. All were experienced hikers. All vanished without a trace in the same general region. Could there be more cabins? One of the FBI agents asked during a briefing. More victims? "It's possible," Sheriff Voss said quietly. "We need to search every structure in a 100-mile radius." The search intensified throughout November. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew grid patterns over the wilderness. Canine units trained to detect human remains worked the most remote areas. Ground teams systematically covered terrain that hadn't been visited in decades. They found several primitive campsites, long abandoned. They found a supply cache buried under rocks containing canned food, the same brands found in the cabin. But they didn't find their suspect. Then, on November 15th, a breakthrough. A day hiker named Patricia Vega reported a disturbing encounter on a remote trail about 30 miles north of where the cabin had been found. She'd been hiking alone when she passed a large man coming the other direction. He was carrying an enormous pack, easily 80 pounds, she estimated. "I said hello," Patricia told deputies, just being friendly. "But he stared right through me like I didn't exist, didn't acknowledge me at all, just kept walking. And I felt genuine fear, like I'd brushed against something predatory." The description matched: large man, 6'2" or taller, unkempt, enormous pack, moving with the confidence of someone who lived in these mountains. The location was noted. Teams began converging. November 18, 2023. The task force established a perimeter around the area where Patricia Vega had reported her encounter. The terrain was challenging, steep, heavily forested, cut by ravines. Easy to evade if alerted, which meant they needed to approach quietly. The plan was simple: grid search, quiet approach, surprise if possible. At 2 p.m., a ground team found an active campsite. The tent was old but well-maintained military surplus. Supplies were organized efficiently. A campfire ring showed signs of recent use. The ashes were still warm. Whoever had been here was gone, but not for long. Inside the tent, they found another collection of photographs, more surveillance shots, more candid images of hikers who had no idea they were being watched. The dates ranged from 2010 to 2023, just weeks ago.
Some of the photos showed people who were very much alive, currently safe at home, completely unaware they'd been stalked. "He never stopped," one of the agents said. At 4:30 p.m., a figure was spotted moving through the trees about a quarter-mile from the camp. Large man, massive backpack, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd spent years in wilderness. "Police, stop where you are." The man ran. The chase through the wilderness lasted nearly 15 minutes. He knew the terrain, knew where to go, how to use the landscape. But the officers had numbers and radios and coordination. They cornered him at a cliff edge, nowhere left to run. For a long moment he stood there, looking over the edge, and several officers tensed, thinking he might jump. Instead, he turned around, dropped his pack, and raised his hands. He surrendered without violence. In fact, he almost seemed relieved, like some part of him had been waiting for this moment. At the sheriff's station, they processed him carefully. Fingerprints, DNA sample, photographs, the works. His name was Gabriel Merrick, age 48, last known address Boulder, Colorado, dating back to 2009. For the past 14 years, he'd essentially been a ghost. No employment records, no tax returns, no credit card usage, no digital footprint. Before 2009, he'd worked as a surveyor for a mining company, which explained his knowledge of remote areas and ability to navigate without trails. He'd had no criminal record. By all accounts, he'd been ordinary until the day he simply walked away from society. During the initial interview, Merrick was eerily calm. His first words were, "I knew someone would find the cabin eventually." He waived his right to an attorney, which was a red flag for his mental state. When asked if he understood why he'd been arrested, he nodded. "You think I hurt them, but I gave them time. Time to understand that the wilderness is pure. People corrupt each other in cities, in society. I was helping them see." The detectives exchanged glances. This wasn't denial, this was delusion. "Did you kill Vincent and Natalie Brennan?" "I gave them peace. They were so caught up in plans and schedules and the noise of life. I helped them find quiet, find each other, really find each other without distractions. You kept them prisoner? I kept them safe from the world." From themselves. In Merrick's current camp, investigators found a journal, years of entries documenting his philosophy. His handwriting was neat, methodical, chillingly rational sounding, even as it described complete madness. The entries laid out his worldview. Human connection in society was toxic. Relationships were performances. But in isolation, forced together in a pure environment, people could be cleansed of society's corruption. They could find authentic connection. The cabin had been his laboratory. His victims were experiments. He genuinely believed he was helping them. "They weren't victims," he'd written in one entry. "They were students. I was teaching them what really matters. In the end, they understood. I could see it in their eyes." The journal contained references to previous lessons, other people he'd held, other students who'd helped him refine his methods. The Brennans weren't the first. He'd been perfecting his technique for more than a decade. Gabriel Merrick was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of kidnapping. The evidence against him was overwhelming. DNA, journals, photographs, the physical evidence from the cabin. His own statements sealed the case. He eventually pleaded guilty, which spared the families the trauma of a trial, but also meant many questions would never be fully answered. Psychological evaluations determined he suffered from delusional disorder and schizoid personality, but he was competent to stand trial. He understood right from wrong, even if his moral framework was completely inverted. Additional investigations were opened for the other missing persons whose photos were found on the cabin wall. Search teams went back into the wilderness, looking for more cabins, more laboratories where Merrick might have held others. They found 2 more cabins, both empty. Both showed signs of the same modifications: exterior locks, reinforced windows, supplies for long-term imprisonment. But no bodies, no evidence of specific victims. During questioning, Merrick admitted to 3 successful experiments before the Brennans. He described them clinically, without emotion, as if discussing laboratory mice. But when pressed for details, where the bodies were, how they died, what their names were, he went silent. "They're part of the forest now," was all he'd say. "They found peace. That's what matters." The families of Bryn Cassidy, Kieran and Meredith Walsh, and Isaac Drummond would never get the closure they deserved. Their loved ones were out there somewhere, but Merrick would never tell them where. February 2025. The sentencing hearing was brief. Gabriel Merrick showed no remorse.
When given the opportunity to make a final statement, he looked directly at the families in the gallery. Society will understand one day. Isolation is the only truth. Connection in your world is a performance. I gave them real connection, even if it was just for a few weeks. That's more than most people ever experience. The judge sentenced him to life without possibility of parole. Troy Brennan didn't attend the sentencing. He couldn't bear to see the man who'd taken his brother from him. But Claire Foster was there, sitting in the front row. When Merrick made his statement, she stood up. "You didn't give them connection," she said, her voice steady despite tears streaming down her face. "You took everything from them. Their future, their dreams, their chance to have children and grow old together. You took my sister. You don't get to pretend that was a gift." Security moved to escort her out, but the judge waved them off. "Let her speak." "They spent their last weeks terrified," Claire continued, "hoping someone would save them, knowing they were going to die. That's what you gave them. Not peace, not understanding, terror." Merrick looked at her with what might have been confusion, as if he genuinely couldn't understand her perspective. The funeral for Vincent and Natalie Brennan was held on a clear March day in 2025, almost 9 years after they disappeared into the mountains. More than 400 people attended. Friends, family, volunteers who'd searched, strangers who'd been moved by their story. They were buried together in adjacent plots, just as they'd sat together at that cabin table. Troy's statement was brief. They spent their last weeks hoping someone would find them, fighting to survive. We failed them then, but at least now there's justice. At least now we can finally say goodbye. Claire spoke about Natalie's love of the mountains, how she'd wanted to be remembered as someone who lived fully, who loved deeply, who wasn't afraid to seek adventure. She loved Vince more than anything. In her last journal entry, she wrote that at least she wasn't alone. At least she had him. Even in the darkest moment, they had each other. The cabin was dismantled by authorities, every piece of wood cataloged as evidence and then destroyed. The location was marked on official maps with a notation that access was permanently restricted. The Forest Service ensured no one could use it again, blocking trails and monitoring the area. Slowly, the clearing began to return to wilderness. Within a few years, you wouldn't know anything had ever been there. The case led to changes in wilderness safety protocols. Satellite tracker rental programs were expanded and subsidized. Regular aerial surveillance of the most remote regions became standard. Several other missing persons cases were solved based on information from Merrick's journals and photographs. But some questions would never be answered. How many victims were there really? How did he choose them? What was the ritual significance of the dinner staging? Why did he finally stop visiting the Brennan cabin? Investigators believed he'd simply moved on to a new location after they died, preparing for his next experiment. If he hadn't been caught, he would have done it again. In her final journal entry before accepting the poisoned wine, Natalie Brennan wrote something that haunted everyone who read it. "I don't know if anyone will ever find this. If you're reading it, that means we didn't make it. We tried. God, we tried. Vince fought so hard. He's hurt and weak now, but he's still trying to protect me. That's who he is, even now. We don't know why this is happening to us. We were just hiking, just celebrating our anniversary. We didn't do anything to deserve this. If you find us, please tell our families we love them. Tell Troy that Vince talked about him every day. Tell Claire that I thought about her every time I looked at the mountains through those gaps in the shutters. And tell everyone that we didn't give up. We didn't stop hoping. Not until the very end. At least I'm not alone. At least I have V." 7 years separated their disappearance from their discovery.
7 years of questions, of families searching, of a community wondering what happened to the young couple who loved the mountains so much. The cabin in the woods held the answers all along, hidden in the forgotten valley just beyond where anyone thought to look. If that elk hadn't led those hunters through the thicket, if they'd gone just 100 yards in a different direction, the cabin might still be standing there, undiscovered. Vincent and Natalie might still be waiting.
Troy Brennan still organizes annual memorial hikes, but now they end at the trailhead rather than going into the forest. A plaque was installed there. In memory of Vincent and Natalie Brennan, may their love be remembered. The mountains of Colorado are beautiful, vast, and unforgiving. They draw people seeking adventure, peace, connection with something larger than themselves. Thousands hike those trails every year without incident, but somewhere in their depths, secrets still wait to be found. Old cabins, hidden valleys, places where the forest is so thick and the silence so complete that you could disappear and not be found for years, decades, forever. Gabriel Merrick is locked in a concrete cell now, but he was just one person, one disturbed mind who found a way to turn paradise into prison. The wilderness itself remains indifferent, beautiful and terrible, offering wonder and danger in equal measure. Vincent and Natalie Brennan went into those mountains seeking an anniversary adventure, a romantic celebration of their love. What they found was horror. But even in that horror, according to Natalie's final words, they found comfort in each other. Some would say that's the real story here, not the evil of what was done to them, but the strength of what existed between them. Strong enough that even facing death, trapped and terrified, they still had each other, still found meaning in that connection. Maybe that's what Gabriel Merrick could never understand, despite all his experiments and observations. Real connection isn't manufactured in isolation. It's not forced or staged. It exists despite circumstances, not because of them. Vincent and Natalie Brennan are at peace now, together, as they always wanted to be. And somewhere in the vast wilderness of Colorado, the forest continues its ancient rhythm, indifferent to human tragedy, keeping its secrets, waiting for the next person brave enough or unlucky enough to venture into its depths and discover what's hidden there. Sometimes the truth is just waiting in the darkness. Sometimes it takes 7 years to find. And sometimes, when you finally open that door, you wish you never had. If this story left you speechless, you're not alone. These mountains hold more secrets than we'll ever know. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And whatever you do, if you're heading into the wilderness, make sure someone knows where you're going. Stay safe out there.